Hello students, in today's class we are going to discuss the last part of plant kingdom, that is life cycles and alternation of generation. So in plants, both haploid and diploid cells divide mitotically. In plants, both haploid cell and diploid cell divide mitotically. So both haploid cell also divide mitotically as well as diploid cell also divide mitotically, and they forms the plant bodies. The different plant bodies are formed. Here haploid plant body is produced by the continuous mitotic division in the haploid cell, and there is diploid plant body is forming by the division of diploid cell mitotically. This haploid plant body and this diploid plant body, this haploid plant body is called the gametophyte, because always gametophyte is haploid, and diploid plant body is called the sporophyte. Is called the sporophyte because sporophyte is always diploid. When this gametophyte produce gametes by gametogenesis, so these are the gametes and they fuse and form the zygote, and this process called the syngamy or fertilization. A diploid zygote is formed. This is called the diploid zygote, and this zygote undergo meiosis and produce the 4 haploid spores. These are haploid, and these haploid spores germinate. They form the Unmo type gametophyte. So this is the life cycle we see usually in the plants, which starts their life cycle with the haploid gametophyte. The plants which are sexually reproducing, they have both gametophyte and sporophytic phase, and the cycle which takes place between haploid gametophyte and diploid sporophyte, that is called the alternation of generation. So this life cycle alternates between haploid gametophyte and diploid sporophyte, and such life cycle is called the alternation of generation. In plants, there are 3 types of alternation of generation in their life cycle. We will discuss all those 3 types of life cycles. Let us see what are those life cycles. Types of life cycle. There are 3 life cycles. One is haplontic life cycle. Another one is diplontic life cycle. Another one is haplodiplontic life cycle. Haplodiplontic life cycle. So in this manner, there are 3 types of life cycle. Now we will discuss every one after one. First of all, we start with the haplontic life cycle. Haplontic life cycle means, in this life cycle, the haplontic stage or haploid stage period is longer compared to the diploid period. So means gametophytic period is longer in compared to the sporophytic. And such life cycle is called the haploidic life cycle. In this life cycle, haploid period is longer and compared to the diploid period. We may see the haploidic life cycle in most of the algae such as volvox, Smt.Girija and Chlamydomonas. We see so the haploidic life cycles in most of the algae like volvox, Smt.Girija and Chlamydomonas. First of all, we will discuss some of the key points of this life cycle and later we will draw the schematic diagram based on these key points. Now, what are the key points or the major points of this cycle? The sporophytic phase is represented only by single cell zygote. Here, the sporophyte is represented by a single cell diploid zygote. A single cell diploid zygote, which is not free living. It is depending on the gametophyte. When meiotic division takes place in this zygote, meiotic division in zygote results 4 haploid spores. The meiotic division in the zygote results in 4 haploid spores. When these spores germinate or develops by metatically, they produce haploid gametophyte. They produce haploid gametophyte, and this haploid gametophyte is dominant, photosynthetic, and it is free living. And this gametophyte produce the gametes. Gametes produced by gametophytes fuse by syngamy, or the process is called the syngamy, and they form one more time single cell zygote. In this manner, the cycle is going to be completed. So, what are the key points we see usually in the haploidic life cycle? The cycle starts from the sporophyte. Starts with the sporophyte. The sporophytic generation is restricted to the or represented by the only single cell diploid zygote. And this zygote is not free living. It is depending upon the gametophyte. And when the meiotic division takes place in this zygote, it produces 4 haploid spores, and when these spores germinate or produce a gametophyte by mitotic division, this haploid gametophyte is dominant, photosynthetic and free living, and it produces gametes by the process gametogenesis, and these gametes when fuse, the process we call the syngamy or fertilization, one more time a single cell zygote is formed. So now we can draw a diagram based on these points. We can draw the life cycle on the basis of this point. So first we start with the zygote, which is diploid, and this zygote produces the 4 spores by the process called meiosis. These spores are haploid. They are haploid. These haploid spores produce the gametophyte. Gametophyte, which is dominant, photosynthetic, free living, and produce the gametes by the process called the gametogenesis. When these two gametes fuse by syngamy or fertilization, they are going to form the again single cell zygote. So here we can notice the life cycle has the maximum period of this life cycle is haploid and diploid stage is restricted only for this zygote. Zygote stage is only diploid stage. Remaining all the stages are in haploid condition. Hence, the life cycle has longer period haploid and shorter period of diploid condition. Hence, this cycle is called a haplontic life cycle. We see haplontic life cycle in the most of the algae like wallworms, Spirogyra and Chlamydomonas. So now we'll discuss the second life cycle, that is diplontic life cycle. Diplontic life cycle. Second type of life cycle is diplontic life cycle. So diplontic life cycle means, as the name only suggests, in this life cycle, diploid period is longer when compared to the haploid period. The life cycle covers most of its times in diploid period and only very short period in the haploid condition. So the key points of this diplontic life cycle, before that we may observe the examples also. We may see the diplontic life cycle in the higher plants like gymnosperms and in angiosperms. We see this diplontic life cycle in the higher plants like gymnosperm and angiosperm. Here the sporophyte is dominant, photosynthetic and it is free living. Whereas haploid gametophyte is represented with highly reduced 1-2 fused celled the haploid gametophyte. The gametophyte is highly reduced and it is represented with 1-2 fused cell structure. So let us draw the diagram. So we may explain it in detail also. So for example, I am going to draw the sporophyte here. Sporophyte means the plant which we see is sporophytic form. These are the leaves and we may see the flowers. Within this flower, we see the gynoecium and androecium. So these are the sex organ present in the sporophyte. So these sex organ produce, gynoecium produce female gametophyte, that is embryo sac, and androecium produce male gametophyte, that is pollen grain. Pollen grain is the male gametophyte. So embryo sac has the egg, which is called the female gamete, and pollen grain has the male gamete. And fusion of these two haploid male and female gamete during syngamy or fertilization, the zygote is forming. So this is the only period which is in haploid stage. the zygote is forming, which is diploid, and this zygote undergo repeated mitotic division, and one more time it forms the sporophyte. So this is the life cycle which has longer diploid period and shorter haploid period. Hence this life cycle is called the diplontic life cycle. So here sporophyte is dominant, free-living, photosynthetic. But gametophyte is reduced with one to few celled structure, and it is depending on the sporophyte. When these gametes are fused by the process called the syngamy, they again form the zygote. Zygote undergo repeated mitotic division and forms the one more time sporophyte. So we see diplontic life cycle in higher plants like gymnosperm and angiosperm. Now we will move to the next cycle, that is haplodiplontic life cycle. Haplodiplontic life cycle. Diplontic life cycle. So haplodiplontic life cycle usually seen in the plants like pteridophytes and bryophytes. In bryophytes, the haploid period is little bit longer than the diploid period, whereas in pteridophytes, diploid period is little bit longer than the haploid period. But more or less they are similar period, and hence this life cycle is called the haplodiplontic life cycle, and we see this cycle in the bryophytes and pteridophytes. But their main plant body in bryophytes and pteridophytes is different. In bryophytes, gametophyte is the main plant body, whereas in pteridophytes, sporophyte is the main plant body. So we'll discuss in both the cases what exactly happens. So we'll discuss here about the bryophytes, and here we'll discuss about the pteridophytes. So life cycle of bryophyte and life cycle of pteridophytes. The main plant body is a haploid gametophyte, which may be prostate or erect, which is haploid, and produce the sex organ. The sex organs we know very well, archegonia and antheridium. So archegonia produce the egg, whereas antheridium produce the anthrozoids. When these two fuse, they are haploid. When these two fuse, the zygote is forming. The zygote is diploid. It's a single cell and diploid. So here the zygote is not immediately undergoing meiosis. So it undergo first mitotic division and produce the sporophyte. Sporophyte, which is diploid. Or this sporophyte is present or depending on the gametophyte. And some of these cells of sporophyte undergo meiosis. Some of the cells undergo meiosis and produce the haploid spores. When these haploid spores fall on the ground, they produce again gametophyte. Here, both haploid and diploid stage are more or less equal, but here gametophyte is the main plant body, hence we may call the haplodiplontic life cycle. But in pteridophytes, what happens? The main plant body is sporophyte. Main plant body is sporophyte, which is diploid. And here the spores are present within the sporangia, and these sporangia are present on the lower surface of the leaves or the frond. So the sporangia produce the spores. Sporangia produce the spores. These spores are haploid. When these spores fall on the ground, they produce the gametophyte. The gametophyte of pteridophyte is photosynthetic, free living, and it is somewhat heart shaped. And which produce both the sex organ archegonia and antheridia. Archegonia produce the egg, antheridium produce the anthrozoids. When these two gametes fuse by syngamy, again zygote is forming, which is diploid, and this zygote undergo continuous mitotic division and forms the one more time sporophyte. So this is the life cycle of pteridophyte, in which both haploid and diploid stages are more or less equal period. Hence, these life cycles are called the haplodiploidic life cycle. But so here one point is important, that is most of the algae are haplontic life cycle, but some of them are also show the haplodiploidic life cycle and also diploidic life cycle. Example, ectocarpus and polysiphonia, culps, being a algae also, they show the haplodiploidic life cycle. Ectocarpus, polysiphonia and culps show haplodiploidic life cycle, whereas fucus is the algae which show the diploidic life cycle. So here I am going to conclude the whole topic. So here in this video we are finishing not only the life cycle and alternation of generation, we are also end up the whole topic, that is plant kingdom. In the next video we will continue the chapter 4, that is the animal kingdom. Thank you.